how can we get them the best, the fastest. So how do you figure that out? Is that just what you've been able to see through years of experience?
I think the big piece, is definitely from, the experience piece of working with a lot of athletes.
Joey is a highly respected figure in the baseball and softball industry, known for his extensive expertise and innovative approaches to player development. With a career dedicated to coaching and consulting, he has worked with MLB All-Stars and potential Hall of Fame candidates, contributing significantly to their success.
I think when you actually care about an athlete, you see things that other coaches might miss.
And I love the way you've broken it down because there's progressions, like you said.
People just from that mocap were able to identify who that hitter was. No face, no jersey, no background, just from the mocap and the movement, you can identify in the mannerisms of the athlete. So who it was actually Mike Trout.
A drill that you give or verbiage you give for someone to start building that so they are more articulate about what they're doing. Today's podcast, we have Joey Cunha. He is an amazing person. He's the CEO of the Farm System. And he's also an MLB hitting coach consultant who's worked with top players in the league all the way to youth level baseball. Probably more so. Am I saying it wrong?
Oh, no, you're
more
okay.
so.
I was just adjusting a couple things. The dogs were, sorry, totally cut you off. But
Okay,
yeah,
no worries.
the dogs are barking, everybody. For some reason, it's the whole, I'm adjusting a couple things. I apologize. My bad.
That's all good. We love dogs. So,
Yeah.
but Joey has tremendous knowledge to share with us today. So I'm super excited to have a nice, deep conversation with him. I've actually met a couple of coaches that have trained under him, and they have nothing but amazing things to say. So Joey, let's jump straight in. I'm going to leave all your contact info and introduction stuff down below. Obviously, if you're on the podcast, people know you provide value. So let's start with that. If you have an athlete who's looking to hit better, where do you start?
Man, yeah. I think that it's really changed over the years. One of the big pieces that I generally go back to is I really just want to see them performing their sport, right, or what they're doing, right. I want to see them in the activity, and kind of start picking up on things that maybe are almost innate at this point. But just, again, like, using that coaching guy, it's like, okay, well, what's the lowest hanging fruit for this athlete? Because that's the biggest thing too, as well, right? We can have our perception of like, okay, well, it's movement or it's, what's going on above the neck, but it's something going on in the brain or et cetera, right? But in reality, every athlete at different stages, something else would be be the low hanging fruit, right? So, at certain, like, let's say I have an athlete that's 12 years old or something like that, right? There might be some really, basic things that would really give them high returns right now. Where if I have an athlete that's a professional athlete, well, a professional athlete, they're going to have a whole different set of things that might be low hanging fruit for them and what they currently struggle with and how they're utilized within inside their game. So I think that that's like a big thing is I really try to take in the context. I really try to take in just what would be the quickest and where could I provide value. I'm almost like asking them without asking them is figuring out like, okay, well, how I view the athlete, where's the area? Maybe it might not even be working with me. Maybe I need to refer them to someone else and I go, hey, I really think your best returns would be if you go with this guy or if you go see this guy or et cetera. Because sometimes I think that's one thing that's vastly overlooked is one of our greatest assets that we could be to someone is connecting them with the right person. So that's
Right.
also something for me that I'm always really looking in is what's the best way I can provide value to this person. And I think that starts with more of a foundation of love and consideration and all those things for the athlete because I want to help them. And that doesn't mean it has to do with me, right? Maybe the best way for me to help them
Right.
is to get them to somebody else.
So you look for that low-hanging fruit of how can we get them the best, the fastest. So how do you figure that out? Is that just what you've been able to see through years of experience?
Yeah. So I think more than anything, I think the big piece, is definitely from the experience piece of working with a lot of athletes. But one of the things from my side, and again, I appreciate the question is I think it's really changed for me over time just because of, I think when you actually care about an athlete, you see things that other coaches might miss. And what I mean by that is when I was younger and a little bit more, I mean, frankly, just more worried about me, right? I was more considered, like, you know, uh, it was very selfishly driven. And I think as I matured as a coach, I really started emphatically caring about the athlete that was in front of me. So when you start looking from that foundational perspective, I think far more you start to identify things that like they'll like, their body is talking to, their mind is talking to, their emotions, their responses, all those things are talking to. And not to get too philosophical, but I think more than
Mhm.
anything, I that really comes back from that experience is being able to identify what those things are, and then also then therefore deploying. Again, I do have a diverse skill set of what I can, maybe we do need to talk about what's going on in their game, or in the sense of how they're thinking about it, spiritually, where they're at. Maybe there's something going on at home that's really holding back their performance. Maybe also, too, which I'm obviously very emphatic about, is movement. And there's, technique, and there's all these other things. Maybe there's something going on with their body that's limiting
Mhm.
them. And then I think if we are not working on the right problem, one of the things I always talk to our instructors about is like, well, what is the real issue, right? Are we trying to fix a symptom, or are we getting to the root cause of what's really causing these issues? I think it's almost like a mechanic. I was thinking about this the other day when I took my truck in for them to service it, right? And what they do is like, okay, you come in, they want the customer's experience. Like, oh, when I drive, this is happening. I get off the freeway and my car's shaking when I brake, right? So you're sharing your experiences,
Mhm.
right? But then also too, okay, well, maybe I'm really good at articulating what's actually going on with my car, but maybe I'm not, right? Maybe I'm awful at intuitively knowing what's going on. I was like, I don't know, just again, just sometimes it shakes, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe I don't recognize it shaking when I press on the brake. So then in that place, it takes a more skilled manufacturer, or a mechanic, to either drive the car and then to feel something. And then when they feel it and
Mhm.
they go, oh, I think it's this. So then what they do is then, okay, right now they take the wheels off. They look at my rotors. They identify like, oh yeah, you know what? Now I'm going, like let that be your X-ray, your MRIs, maybe we're using
Mhm.
data or things to connect and kind of tell me the story. And then based on the evidence, we make an opinion, right? You go to a doctor and you get an opinion based on their experience. And I think usually in the world right now, when it comes to really instructors, the word bias is meant in a negative connotation. But I kind of think of this as like, well, when someone goes and sees a doctor, like I'm paying for your bias. I'm paying for your
Mhm.
experience. I'm paying for how you view the world and how you view these experiences and why you're getting such success comparatively to somebody else's. So yeah, you might be biased, or maybe from your experience. And also too, if we're being honest, we're obviously all biased, right? We're all
Yeah.
biased based on our experiences, how we grew up, where we grew up,
Mhm.
what we, all those things, right? So I think that that's also the piece for me too, as well as from that experience. What I've learned is not necessarily being um, so quick to point to this is for sure the issue, rather than, well, let's explore. Let me listen to your feedback. Let me drive the car. Let me see how the car is driving. Let me take the wheels off. Let
Mhm.
me look at the data. Let me kind of go through all of those things, and let's actually be right about what we're working on.
Right. It's a very holistic approach, it sounds like, where you're looking at every piece of the fundamental puzzle that could be causing that root issue. That's tremendous for figuring out what the possible outcome, well, not outcome, but possible problem could be for why they're not reaching their goals. For someone who doesn't have a coach who can help them with that, is there a way for them to build that internal awareness? Is there a drill that you give or verbiage you give for someone to start building that so they are more articulate about what they're doing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think more to for me, how what I like to do is up for when you come from like the skill acquisition approach, right? When you come from a skill acquisition lens, you're always trying to increase feedback loops, right? So the biggest way
Mhm.
that I know to build awareness is to set up constraints or feedback loops to be quicker, right? How do I get more
Okay.
feedback quicker? And so if instead of me doing something and going like, I don't know if that worked, I don't know if this is actually going this way, is I'll set up and I'll say, how constrained can I make this so that the athlete themselves can get this feedback, right? Like, is there
Mm,
actually a big difference from this to that? So for example, it's not necessarily a specific drill, or it's not specifically, you need to do this or you need to do that. I think it's a foundational principle that um, I'm going to constrain so that I know, not only they know as an athlete, but I know as well, right? That they're actually getting better at this or not. So, like, let me give you an example of this. Let's say I'll set up a drill where, let's say, if an athlete is maybe they're pulling off the ball or they're coming off the ball, let's say a specific baseball example, right? Their front side's like rolling out, they're not getting force into the
mhm,
ball. Everything is kind of pulling off to their pull side. Maybe I'll give them a drill that has like a recoil or like a trout step over, something like that. Well, now what do those drills do? There's not nothing particular about the drills other than I know that these two drills, they won't be able to complete them unless, right? They won't have success during this drill unless they do and they're better at what we're trying to get better at, right? So those are called
mhm,
like destination cues. So I use a lot of destination cues. So destination cues would be like, for example, it's a lot of direct feedback. So let's say you get in your car and you put in a destination into your GPS. I'm going from here to here. Well, when you do that, what the GPS does is then creates a route for your body, like, and connect this with your body,
mhm.
is you tell your body, right, I want this outcome. So your body
Right.
designs a route to get to that
Yeah.
outcome. Now, is that the most efficient route? No, it could just be based on, what the body can currently do with its current constraints, individually, within that task, within that environment. This is the solution that your body came up with. It doesn't mean that that's the only route. It doesn't mean that it's the most efficient
Mhm.
route. It doesn't mean that that route won't change as we develop technique, as you get stronger, as you get, more skilled at what you do. And so we, again, with that, to use that drill is I'm picking that drill because I know it will give the athlete feedback and me immediate feedback on if they're actually getting better at these things. So I think that that's the thing, from me, from that side, is that I'm really interested in getting athletes building their awareness by setting up environments, tasks, and constraints. In that mix, right? That will give the athlete more feedback and also me feedback on how their body's responding.
I love that. The destination cues where you're literally letting your brain figure out the body to make that outcome happen. And
Yes.
then you can figure out how to make it a little bit more efficient, where some intricacies need to be changed, mechanics or mobility wise. That's very interesting. It's a very outcome specific
Yeah,
type
and
of
and
approach.
it's like a spin-off. I think this is why, for example, and I'm sure that you're well aware of this side, right? With like the peer-reviewed studies. Peer-reviewed studies, they're amazing, they're awesome, they're useful. I understand the point of them. The piece with it though is some of the things with the peer reviewed, let's say we go down the peer reviewed study route, there's restrictions in, like right now, if you go into a skill acquisition and you read their studies, they're going to say, oh man, external cues are amazing. They're way better than internal cues. Here's why, here's the data, peer reviewed, boom, we put this study out, right? The thing is though, is if you look at the study, it's like, okay, well, who's giving the internal cues, right? Like, is it the scientist that doesn't really know the task? Right? Because if I give you the wrong cue, right? If I give you something that is going to lead you astray, well, then no, that actually is going to show us in the data and results wise that internal cues don't work really well. And that's how I can get led to that example. Or, for example, the reason external cues are so good is it's way easier for an unskilled coach for them to say, hey, hit that ball to right field, right? Yeah. That they let their body organize itself, right? The athlete is going to organize their body based on what they're trying to do. And they're going to see better results as a lower level coach. But I'm also too, as I've become much more skilled as a coach, I'm much, I'm way more talented at giving internal cues now than I was when I first originally started coaching. And a lot of that has to do with understanding anatomy, what's going on underneath the hood, your
Hmm.
CNS, all those things, how your body's responding. Some of the also too,
Right.
like the tone in which you say things, the timing in which you say things, and also too, or maybe when you don't say anything, right? That's a big thing as a coach too, to learn is when,
Right.
to close your mouth. And,
Yeah, when to shut
I
up.
think, yeah. And I think, for example, another reason I think, destination cues work so well is they're obviously intimately tied to external cues, right? And in the way of you're telling your body a destination and then it's aligning and the body is finding out a way to execute that. And so I think along with that, right, when we get into that piece of where I would say, hey, we want you to be able to, do this drill. At the end of your drill, I want you to do this movement. Well, now all these internal things change, even though a destination cue isn't innately internal or external. It could be either, right?
Mhm.
It allows the body and the CNS basically to create routes and then us to refine and tighten those based on maybe again micro progressions or micro regressions to really tighten up the technique or the route that the body chose to take, right? So also always love to say too with it, because I know that a lot of coaches end up listening to stuff and goes, man, this sounds like very philosophical or deep or other things. But I think this is the thing, and in my opinion, I'm sure you've experienced this as well, as deep as you've gone into your field, is that I think you got to go deep so that you can come back to the surface. The only reason you understand
Totally.
the surface is by understanding the depth. So to my athlete, I might not be talking to them about anything you and I are talking about right now, right? But I'm using that skill, just like if you go to a doctor, he doesn't tell you about all the physiology and everything that's going on, X, Y, and Z, right? They're just telling you the spark notes, right? Like, hey, let's try this. This might work. In my experience, this has worked in the past. This is, the overall route. Maybe I make an analogy and I connect it with them and we move on. But internally, what's going on and, between the ears up here is there's a lot more going on from my experience of why I'm choosing that drill or this route or why I'm talking to them with this tone, etc. And that's
Yeah.
all based off of just years of, training athletes.
Yeah. And this conversation is really good for coaches, right? It may be a little over the top for maybe some athletes, but I want to go back to the internal cues part. So, when do you like to use internal cues? Is this something that you're having them actually think about prior to, being on the plate? Or is this something that's reserved for practice when you're doing, live BPs? Or when do you use the internal cues?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah. I think there's a couple different places right off the top of my head. First off, I don't think I necessarily have a rule of like, this is when you shouldn't or can't or any of those things because every athlete's going to be different. But I do, and I would say more often than not, we use them quite a bit in the cage in very controlled environments when we're making very fine tuning movements. But I also don't reserve it to just that environment because, for example, let's say a guy throws me a slider, I pull off of it, I hit a foul ball. I know he's going to throw me that pitch again. Well, there's this whole process that goes in between that pitch to the next pitch, right? I got, let's say, 8 seconds, right? I'm on the clock, right? So I'm on the clock. I might step out the box, might use an internal cue like, I'm going to feel like I got punched in the stomach right as I'm hitting the ball, right? Creating this brace in the middle part of my body. That's an internal cue. So the athlete does that and a dry swing before they get into the box, right? They feel this internal cue. They create that feeling. Now, when they go to hit, maybe they're not using that internal cue, but maybe they're using the feeling that they had, right? So I always tell hitters, a lot of hitters struggle to think and hit, which makes sense because especially with how the brain works, right? It's just too slow. But at the same time, what we can do is we can feel and hit. And that's something that, again, that is super useful where, you might be utilizing those cues. And then also, too, specifically, certain athletes, based on especially what's going on with their brain and how they process some of this information, is certain athletes are going to do better with internal cues than other athletes, right? Some athletes, their body and their brain is better at organizing movement if I give them a ton of externals, right? Especially if they're really athletic and their whole life they've never really utilized internal cues, and so they're just used to, oh, I'm trying to do this and I tell my body to do this, and then man, I just keep trying to do that over and over again, and that's basically how I've learned to acquire skills. But also at the same time, one of the things that I also always bring up, I know that if I give somebody the wrong internal cue, and not necessarily wrong, but maybe in this moment, every cue is, again, no cue is bad, no cue is good. It's just like, does it work or does it not, right? Like they all work, they all suck. And they go both ways. It's more about the timing to who, the context, all the stuff. And then, so if I give the process of, let's say I give someone an internal cue and it really messes them up, if it has the power to mess them up that bad, shouldn't it also have the power to really help them, right? It obviously means that it has a major effect on how the CNS and how the entire body responds. And so if it has that power to bring maladaptations, does it not also have the power to bring good adaptations? And so I think it's more about learning to hone. And like I said, I've just learned from my experiences. Like I use internal cues with guys every single day, right? So it's not when someone just comes out with a paper or something and they're like, oh, these don't work. It's like, well, I can show you an example right now of, man, like I'll have a hitter go, that's literally the number one cue I've been focused on for the last 6 months. And I've hit the best I've hit my life or something, right? So they do work. It's just everything I think needs context.
So your take is more so that they do work. It's just the ones that are not working are just the wrong ones. They just don't have the right internal cue.
Yeah. And I think one, again, they're not taking in, they do these studies where they get all these different athletes, right? Or these often actually not, obviously it's very tough in studies to get elite athletes in your study. So they typically get, and then what they call elite would be someone that played past high school because they're going by the numbers, right? They're going, oh, you're in the top 5% of all athletes, et cetera. You played college, right? But when we look at it, that wouldn't be an elite athlete, right? That would be, like generally a college athlete. Like, yes, they're more than the general public, sure. But, there's a lot of rough high school players out there, including I was one of them, right? So with that, even though I went on and played college and got a lot better, my point though is I actually became much more skilled at learning skill acquisition and actually being to acquire skill as I learned more about, the field of study, right? And how much information was actually there, and then actually applying it with athletes and seeing it actually roll out. And so, as you mentioned, what I would say is that a lot of times you have a scientist that is very good at documenting, following a scientific procedure, that running and conducting a study. But the problem might be is, one, did they set up a study that would actually, like if you were a practitioner, you would set up a study very different compared to someone that is just in a lab that works at Stanford, that has never worked with an athlete in their life. I almost think of it like, all the business instructors in school that have never ran a business in their entire life, but they're the business instructor, right? It's just like you're asking, you have philosophical or theoretical knowledge, but you don't have practical, hands-on. That's why they make you in curriculum do, practicals, or you have to do your practicums, and you have to have all this experience that you have to go have, or an internship, or etc. But also too, we all know that generally schooling is going to be about 10 years behind, if not more in certain areas. I know right now, for example, this is going to ruffle some feathers, but right now, if I went and took a CSTS, I would have to answer some questions intentionally wrong so I could pass the test, because I know more than, how the test is designed, right? It's designed for you to pass the test, not necessarily that it's all the correct information or what we now know from us training athletes. And so, unfortunately, education generally, especially at mass scale, is generally behind, obviously, what someone in the field, boots on the ground, might be doing, that are doing these scientific studies, constantly, day over day, as a practitioner.
Quick segment break, but you're going to want to hear this. If you're an athlete, coach, or parent, and you want faster reaction, this is where we start. This is called vector ball. This ball unpredictably bounces and it changes colors, red, green, or blue. We use this to sharpen the reaction time, focus, and coordination. And here's what makes it different. Whenever you see a different color, you can assign it to left, right, pass, shoot. adding a cognitive load, meaning that frontal lobe, while you're moving around, is making faster decisions. We use this with athletes every week, and we hardwire this decision making. Train your brain, train your eyes, dominate your game. Grab the vector ball in the link in the bio or scan this QR code to get started. Let's get back to it.
Totally. Yeah. I see that in our field as well. But yeah, it takes time for even research to catch up to
Yeah.
what most of, let's say, Olympic athletes are doing or the elite of
Yep.
the elite are doing.
Which
And then you just start seeing average people doing it too. But yeah, 10 years, maybe 15 years later.
Yeah, and if you get like I forgot what it's called, like the Kruger effect, right? Where it's like you think you know everything, right? And then you get to the top and then it kind of comes back the opposite way, right? Which is like where, just understanding of the, okay, you got your early adopters, you have your early adopters, all those things, and then you get the mass people. And then 20 years from now, everybody's like, oh yeah, that's common knowledge. That's what everybody does. Yeah, across the board, right? Like,
Yeah.
but at the same time, that takes, not only does that take a lot of time, but then you also have like I talked about with like the scientists, I feel like even from school and things like that, right? Like you think you know so much because you've studied all these things and you've done it your whole life and all those other things. You actually step into a cage or you actually go to work with an elite athlete and you're like, wait a second, like there's all these things I don't know, right? There's all these ways. It's like, one, great, I can read a graph. I know what it looks like from the textbook. I know all these other things.
Mhm.
And in reality, it's not that way. Like, and one of the examples I give from that is like when I was in college, I broke my hand because I was being a smart college boy, threw a punch at my roommate, broke my hand in half, right? Snapped my hand.
Man.
So I snapped my
Yeah.
hand. I go to the doctor. It's a local small hospital. That's close to where I was. The town was like 2,500 people. I had to go to the bigger town just so I can go to the hospital. And I go to get my X-ray, and I'm like, "Hey, like, do you think my hand's broken?" And he's like, "Well, does your hand normally look like that?" And I'm like, "Well, no." And he's like, "No, for sure, it's broken." So, anyways, he looks at it and he goes, "Hey, in the textbook, your hand can be broken. Basically, this bone can be 39 degrees. It can handle up to 39 degrees, 40 degrees. And I think the angulation of my bone at the time was like 38 degrees." And he's like, "So you'll be fine." So he puts me in a splint, just some general resetting, puts it in a splint. I recover. I'm juiced. I don't have to have surgery. I can get back to playing.
Yeah.
I can do all these things. He followed the textbook. The textbook says 40 degrees. I get back to playing. The first day, I dive back into a bag. And someone tries to pick me off. I slide into the bag. My hand immediately swells. And then I come back to Vegas. I see a hand specialist, and he's like, "Oh no, like, dude, you're an elite athlete. You constantly are in contact with your hands. That textbook is talking about someone that is working in a cubicle, or like, can it, is it functional? Like, could you just do that, right? Comparatively to like an elite athlete, right? Like you got to be able to
Yeah.
perform at an elite level. You're going to have, strikes with your hands constantly. So that's not going to work. So he scheduled me surgery the next day, puts a rod through the back. And even to this day, my hand, my
Mhm.
pinky sometimes just doing its own thing, wiggling out over here. But, at the same
Totally.
time, that's what I mean is like, man, it's really important. Yeah, your internship's great, all those other things. But in reality, what you really need to do, and everybody that's really been in the field knows, primarily, like that's just the starting. That's just your foundation. Your schooling is just a foundation. That's great. But in reality, you need to go work in these fields and go do this for a really long time. And also, if you are running studies and you want it and you really have a heart that you want this to be accurate, you should be partnering with high level practitioners so they can even help
Mhm.
you ask the right questions, right? Because one of the things
Yeah.
I also think about all the time is that a lot of times in some of these studies, they're looking for a needle in a haystack rather than particularly going because they know something. Like, for example, how does this, like, we use the old example, I'm sitting below the tree, the apple falls, hits me in the tree, I make an observation. Well, there must be a force that acts on that apple that makes it hit me in the tree, or like it makes me hit in the head. So then I go studying, looking specifically for something instead of looking for a needle in a haystack. I'm going to study something very particular because I
Mhm.
know that there's something there. I don't know exactly what it might be, but I know that there's something there, and then I'm going to go and do that. So I think the key in a lot of ways is asking the right questions. And you can't ask the right questions unless you're actually, in the mud, right? Like boots on the ground. And I think that a lot of times, you need that cohesion where you need, what's going on in the lab and a practitioner coming together so that you can actually study things that are major impactful rather than I'm going to run a study to tell me that's peer reviewed that fire is hot. Okay. Like, great. Great. I'm happy we ran this whole study. And now we have a census of at least the ones that peer reviewed this, because now there's also going to be a week from now, there's going to be 4 studies that counter this study that all come to this unclear conclusion of the results seem to indicate X, Y. Okay. All right. So it's like, you're doing the dance constantly when you're going through some of those studies, because again, like there is information there, but in reality, like we mentioned, most of the cutting edge stuff is like, again, that's by the time a peer reviewed study's done, it's, if you're waiting on peer reviewed studies, you're going to be years behind.
Yeah, and especially for the players that you're and the coaches that you're trying to get trained, they're not they don't have time. They're already at a higher level. And so they want to improve now. A lot of times, what I hear a lot from coaches or even players is that they do great in a batting game. But then when the actual game comes out, like
Yep.
they fall apart.
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
We actually just covered this in our retreat. I know you just recently, we were kind of just talking about Ralph, and he was here, and we were kind of
Mhm.
talking through, even then with our coaching retreat that we had out here in Vegas, is one of our chapters is on skill acquisition. So we have a curriculum that put together 16 chapters. And one of those chapters is skill acquisition. And so what we try to do is not a like 100 level course. What it is from, hey, all the information that we've acquired within skill acquisition, we try to shove into this course of these are things that we think for sure you should know. And these are things that would be lowest hanging fruit for you right now. Like, man, this would fast forward your career if you knew this stuff, 10 years, right? One of the things that I talk about quite a bit is that a lot of coaches have a limited understanding of skill acquisition, and a lot of players do obviously as well. And so what they do is they go and they hit like this, and they hit in the cage and they hit their front toss and they hit their machine. But also too, one of the things that they have a disconnect with is there's a blending process of how we actually get to high performance. And what I mean by this is with progressions and regressions, one of the things that we constantly do is we're always blending and going back and forth and constraining the task. So I think what it is they're doing these macro progressions, right? They hit front toss, they crush these balls, and then they go into game off 95. And then they're like, oh, I should be moving the same. Well, it's like, okay, well, first off, you have a disconnect. There's multiple things here, right? You have a disconnect of perception and action, right? When my body sees a stimulus, this is how my body responds. Okay, that's one.
Mhm.
2, on the same side of that, though, it's not that innately that front toss is bad, right? And this is one of the examples I give from this, right? Like, so for example, you can train somebody to react differently, right? We know that we can do this, and we actually train this with, like, let's say, I like to use extremes because I feel like it draws us like a clear understanding. So for example, let's say I'm a Navy SEAL, right? And I want to train myself that within a split moment, if I hit the corner and I see this stimulus, that I'm going to execute this, right? We
Mhm.
know that we can train that. Now, does it take time? Does it take a lot of preparation? And also too, I think they are actually pretty good at skill acquisition, because when you put life or death on the line, people tend to get pretty talented at things because they're really worried about doing these. And some of these things might be not necessarily from schooling, but more from experiential knowledge that they have from training. And one of the things, for example, that we do, and I bring this up, okay, if I'm a Navy SEAL and we take the idea, because this is something that's in the sports space right now, right? Which is like, we should always be facing harder, right? Like it should be, if we're facing 95 every night, we should be facing 110. If he's throwing 10 inches of movement, we're going to face 50 inches of movement, or what, something crazy, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
in reality, one of the things I'm like, hey, there's nothing wrong with training harder than what you're going to face, but you also have to progress to this. There is a system in place of, like, there's 2 analogies I would give. Let's say I wanted to get you better at boxing. If you're a novice boxer if I put you fighting against Mayweather every day in the ring, you're not going to get really great at boxing. You might get great at trying to protect yourself because he's just going to knock you out every day over and over and over and over and over again. And then you
Yeah.
actually might get worse at boxing because instead of learning how to box, you're just trying to survive. So we would progress to that. Now, there is boxers out there that if they sparred with Mayweather every day, it actually would be pretty good for them because they're ready for that challenge. They're ready to constantly do that battle of checking it. Now, I would also argue, though, sparring or the act of your actual sport is the test. It's not where I really get better. It's where I test my skills. It's where I test my training, right? So just like when we're in school, we can get better at taking tests. That's a skill in itself. But in reality, it's just testing what I already previously knew. That's one analogy. The other analogy I would give is when there's this big thing out right now, especially within baseball, that we should never practice at these lower the regressions, like what would be off the tee, front toss, etc. Right? Well, if that's true, then why are Navy SEALs that are very skilled at obviously what they do and handling guns and all their other stuff, right? They walk through with like Nerf guns or airsoft guns or all these other things, and they will walk through the building and they don't do everything at life or death, and they don't train. They don't train innately. If we go by the thought process of it's got to be harder than what I face, a lot of people think that as, well, if there's going to be the example, maybe over to analogy would be, well, then what we should do is instead of training for they might have guns, we're going to make every room wired with explosives. And also too, there might be an airstrike. And also too, there might be an alien invasion at the same time. It's like, okay, well, hold on. What it really means and how they actually apply it. What they do is, you know what? We think there's only going to be 5 guys in the house, but we're going to train for 10. And there's always a scale and a spectrum when it comes into skill. What we do is like, okay, they're going to walk in with airsoft guns, let's say, or a paintball gun or whatever, right? And something's going to hit me and go, okay, I would have took a shot right there, right? And that's feedback for me. I don't need to risk life or death every single time to get better at micro skills inside of the macro skill, right? Of maybe clearing a building or something like that, right? What I think specifically within this, right, is what we do, and this is something that actually, especially people miss, and this is what we talk about within our skill acquisition course, is there's these micro progressions that people miss. And micro progressions might be the same exact drill, right? Let's say we're doing front toss. Let's say I'm having them do a drill, but now when I progress to the next progression of drills, the next one they can't do, like they're failing. And we usually give a range in skill acquisition, right? You want to stay within, there's a not too hot, not too cold. There's a range in the middle, right? Well, if I'm succeeding too much, I'm not learning. And if I'm failing too much, I'm just practicing bad habits, right? So there is generally a level there that I want to be succeeding around 6 to 7 times out of 10, right? That's a good where it's like, I'm not failing, I'm not practicing bad habits, but at the same time, I'm also not getting it right every time. I'm having to get better, right? Now, if I start getting 9, 10 out of time, 9 or 10 out every time, well, then yeah, I need to progress, right? And then obviously there's some context we put in there based on where the athlete is, where they are, for example, emotionally, spiritually, all these other things that we have to take in. Like, for example, if you came to hit today and, I got a 15-year-old that just, broke up with his first girlfriend, his first love, right? And they broke up on all these things. Today might not be the best day to have him fail more than, that. Maybe he needs successful today. Maybe he needs a little pat on the butt. Maybe he needs a human experience, right? And the same thing the opposite way, right? Sometimes certain athletes, they love a challenge, right? And also too, and it's something very particular that I might design a certain day that I'm like, hey, for example, you're going to go play today. Are you going to be successful 7 out of 10 times? No. More than often, again, if you go play in a game, you're going to be, if you're great, you'll probably be successful 3 out of 10 times. So that's great to challenge, and there's a time and a place for that. But it's not necessarily the best learning environment. And again, for specifically with learning these micro skills. So let me backtrack. I know I had a little weave there. I'm gonna bring it back. What we would do is, let's say we step up to the next progression. Like, let's say I can do it in front toss, but I can't do it off batting practice, right? And
Okay.
in front toss, I'm 7, 8 out of 10. When I go to batting practice, right, I'm 4 out of 10, right? I'm failing too much. When I do the same exact drill, all I did is change the stimulus, which was the speed of the ball, and it's coming overhand instead of underhand now, right? In my opinion, front toss, the batting practice, is a macro progression. There's a lot of micro progressions in between there. Now, what would those micro progressions could be? They could be
Just gonna ask.
time constraints. They could be changing the angle. Okay, we're doing front toss, but I'm going to change the angle at which the ball is coming in. When I said time constraints, maybe we're going to do rapid toss where I have to do the same thing back to back with limited amounts of time, right? Maybe I'm tossing the ball faster from front toss, right? Also, too, maybe instead, I'm going to make it harder by constraining where you can hit the ball, what's considered an out, what's considered not, right? I can change all these little micro things that make it harder. And then also another thing might be, from front toss to batting practice, even if I was doing the same exact drill, well, there's also a micro progression, and maybe there's a harder drill that I can do in front toss that would bridge the gap between being able to do it from front toss to batting practice. So what that would look like would be, let's say I can do it what we would consider launch, which is like, okay, after I stride, my foot gets down, I'm about to create rotation, right? Sometimes we'll have hitters start in that position, right? I want you to swing from here, no momentum, no stride. We're going to swing from this very constrained position. Okay, great. He's great at it now from front toss. But then we go to batting practice from constraint, and he really struggles, like, from hitting from that constrained position. He can't do it. So if a simplistic version of this would be, okay, we'll go back to front toss, but we're going to add in a stride now, right? And so now we have a stride. Okay, great. We crush it with the stride. Now, when we go back to batting practice, we might go from that launch or that constrained position, and we'll see that skill transfer a lot easier, because that is, again, sometimes I can make you do a drill from front toss that might be way harder than a drill from batting practice, right? Even though it's batting practice and the stimulus has changed, if I change the drill that you're doing, it's also more complex. Again, I know we're in the weeds here a little bit, but hey, I'm saying you brought it up, so let's do it. Right?
I love the weeds.
Yeah, when I'm blending, there's an art. I call it the art of the blend, right? Which is being able to identify what's more difficult for the athlete to complete. And based on a couple different things, and off of our basic things, which is, task, environment, individual. For example, the task might be hit front toss to right center field for a double. Okay, that's my task. My environment might be, for us, maybe we manipulate it by putting them on like farm boards, which are like sliding surfaces, right? So we change the environment. Or I pump loud music, right? I pump really loud music, so or like fan noise, or I have people yelling at them as they're hitting. No, don't do that. You can't, whatever, right? Interrupting that process. I can manipulate the environment. Right. And then we also have the individual, right? Maybe I have traumas from when I was younger of my dad yelling at me or whatever, right? And that constrains me. Or maybe I don't create enough force to be able to do this. Or maybe I have constraints within my pelvis and my pelvis doesn't want to move that way. Those are all individual things, right? We're taking all that in, and what seems, like I said, like if you were a general coach listening to me talk about these things, it'd be like, man, this is a lot to keep in mind. But in reality, this is all, just like when you, for example, when me and you go and look at somebody's eyes and we're going to train their thing, I look at it and I'm like, whoa, this is a lot, right? This is because this is not what I do every day, right? So I'm going to
Yeah.
go, whoa, this is confusing, all these other things. And now if you taught me it over time and you added years of understanding, let my brain, have these things, now it becomes for you second nature, just like it is, when
Yeah.
I see these things, all this is going on in my head subconsciously without me needing to do it, or think about it consciously. It's just computing. And I'm like, you know what? Boom, select, drill, Y, whatever. Right. And, again, I just more wanted to talk about the process. And I think the biggest reason that people have issues connecting it from one to the other is they don't know how to blend the skill very well. And as you know, especially with, some of the perception and all those things that have to do with how our, brain takes in the information and, from the eyes and all those things as well, is that a lot of
Mhm.
times, our system can get overwhelmed if I'm tracking a ball at 15, 20 miles an hour, and now here comes a stimulus at 95, right? And then, people not understanding from a baseball standpoint, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the data I've researched is that we can't actually track the ball to the bat. The ball's moving at
Mhm.
too high rate of a speed. So what your body is really doing is, yes, it's tracking the first initial 20 feet or whatever. And then it's the brain is projecting based on that information where that ball would end up, and then we're swinging. That's why it's like an improbable skill. We're swinging where we think the ball is going, right? And again, like I said, I'll definitely a point for you from that side. But again, that's what I tell athletes all the time is like that's why it's such a skill. Is it's not just it's not your body, your brain is doing this very skilled task of projecting based on limited information where
Mhm.
it thinks the ball is going. And then even if it is 100% accurate on where that ball is going to go, it needs to make your body execute a movement that is not only great, but they're on time, which
Yeah.
is, it's
100%.
a complex thing.
And I love the way you've broken it down because there's progressions, like you said, and then the micro progressions are super important because when you're going from a live game where you might get, an 80 mile per hour, you might get 100 mile per hour. I mean, the brain's ability to, like you said, project or predict where the ball is going to be is like totally different, 80 versus 100. And if you're not getting the micro progressions in there, then it's almost impossible for you to, hit a ball during a live game. You need a lot of reps in those micro progressions.
Yes. And again, this is when you also get into the science of, attractors and fluctuators, right? Which, again, and the analogy I give for this is inside the course. I don't know if you know Dr. Greg Rose with On Base U and TPI and all of them for within golf, but
Yeah. TPI,
he
yeah.
yeah. So he did a post years ago at this point. I think it was back in like 2018 or something like that, and he made a post of a 3D image or a movement from their mocap lab of a hitter taking a swing, and he showed their data on the charts of on the screen as he's talking about what this hitter is good at and what X, Y, and Z. People just from that mocap were able to identify who that hitter was. They no face, no jersey, no background, just
Yeah.
from the mocap and the movement, you can identify in the mannerisms of the athlete who it was. So who it was actually Mike Trout. And everybody identified it because right now we all intuitively know this. If we close our eyes, we can imagine what Mike Trout's swing looks like, what Ken Griffey Jr.'s swing looks like. We know what it looks like in our head, right? So that way we innately know that athletes don't move randomly every time they swing the bat, right? They actually have states, right, within their movements that are patterns or what they would consider attractors, right? These are things that happen on every single swing, right? They've stabilized these attractors that these things happen every single swing. Now, if your whole swing is exactly identical every single swing, you're not going to be very successful, right? But that's where it brings in fluctuations. If you want to look at the opposite end of the spectrum, let's say pro athletes have very deep attractor wells These are things that they do over and over and over again. They're very consistent, right? They have very deep attractor wells. Kids are fluctuate kings, right? Like if you have every time you have a kid come in, they have a new movement every swing. It's crazy different than the last swing, right? You do a
especially
session
as they
with
get older too.
yeah, exactly. You get a 9-year-old, he comes and swings one week, the next week he comes in and you're like, who is this? This is a whole nother guy.
Yeah.
So you need both though, right? You need attractors, you need things that again, you get to very key positions that give you the ability to decide very late. For example, let's say Mike Trout strides completely out of the box. He strides completely open and he's like, like a little kid, maybe does some crazy wild movement. Well, that would not give him the ability late if the ball is breaking away from him or doing whatever for him to be able to adjust to that, right? So you do need things. And if you actually look at not only, and the data actually supports this, when we look at our kinematics, our mocaps, and our force data prior to swinging, the data is very consistent, right? Hitters, especially with the most elite hitters, they're almost identical every single time. The load is almost identical, right? The forces are really close and a really tight bandwidth, right? And I'm going to say, when I'm saying almost identical, again, for the absolutist and the listening right now, right? There's a bandwidth, but the most elite athletes, that bandwidth is tight, right? So there's not this big, massive spectrum of options. They just have the right options. They have less options than a little kid, but they have the right options. Little kids have a million options, right? And that's the problem, which is when you get into like Bernstein's degrees of freedom problem, right? Is that imagine driving a car that has 10 steering wheels, right? Or just a steering wheel on every single wheel, right? It would be problematic. It would be really tough to try to coordinate this thing, right? But as and the first stage of that is you freeze degrees of freedom, which means your body, it's like when you slip on ice, right? Your whole body like flexes and it creates tension and it tries to create a whole bunch of stability. It actually removes. And this is where when you go and you learn boxing classes, where you look like you're flexing your whole body when you throw a punch and it looks really unathletic. This is the freezing degrees of freedom problem, right? Which is that you have all these degrees of freedom and your brain is always trying to protect itself before it performs, right? So it doesn't want to do a movement with a whole bunch of force that it has no control over. If your tissue is not used to that velocity, that speed, that angulation, that stretch, all those things, boom, we're going to pop something, right? So it tries to flex and create all this stability so that you don't create injuries. The problem is elite athletes don't look like they're flexing their whole body like a bodybuilder every time they throw a punch. They look loose and fluent and they can pop through all these angles and all these things, right? And that's where, as we get more skilled, we get better at turning things off, and the tissue, the brain, the co-contractions, the CNS, all those things, right? Adapt to the task, where I'm able to throw really powerful movements by not over recruiting, but recruiting the right options, right? And also too, the tissue adapts where it's able to lengthen at that speed and all those things over time. And then we're able to turn off certain motor units that we might not need, for this action. And so that's why I think, and a lot of times too, we have there's a lot of people, let's say in the S&C community or PTs or science community, biomechanists, all those things, right? Where they are really deep in their fields, but they might not understand skill acquisition. And so they approach it from a lens of, well, as a biomechanist, like for example, I've heard this many times. Okay, well, elite athletes, they're getting a massive vertical force on ground force with their lead side as they're hitting the ball. So then certain people would tell them, well, slam your front leg into the ground to create this high, a vertical force. While that does create a high vertical force, that's not what they're doing. That's not what elite athletes are doing. You're hyper focusing, right? Or it was I think, who was it? Just recently, not recently, he wrote a book a couple years ago where he talked about when a particular or individual measurement becomes a goal, it ceases to be a good measurement. And that's
heard that.
And why that is, for example, if I go to Mike Trout and I say, hey, Mike Trout, your bat speed's low, which it's not. And your bat speed's low, and we're measuring you today for your bat speed. Well, guess what we're gonna see in that data? His bat speeds are gonna be the highest that we've never measured. Why? Because we told him we're measuring bat speed, right? So that's what he's gonna focus on. And now the
Whatever you
problem is,
measure goes up.
yeah, because that's what we tell them. That's why in scientific studies, you try to, you don't want them to know what you're measuring. You even, sometimes they'll lie to them. They'll tell them that we're measuring something different just so that they're off course. But this is the problem though, too, is then somebody comes out with a study, right? If I see a sensor on my bat, you might not need to tell me that you're measuring my bat speed, but I know you're measuring my bat speed. Or you make it public that you're going to contract negotiations and you go, well, Mike Trout, as you can see on this graph, for over the last 3 years, your bat speed's been going down, right? And they use that as a leverage point to sign him for less money.
Yeah.
So what does he try to do? Then he goes on the field, he tries to up his bat speed so that he can show that. The problem is, though, is you get when you study things from a different perspective, and this is what I mean from these studies. Let's say you look at somebody like Mookie Betts, right? Mookie Betts didn't have his greatest year this year, but obviously, again, we could all agree that he's like an MVP candidate almost every single year. He's, obviously, he's one of the highest paid
He's amazing.
athletes for a reason, all the things, right? So I like to use him because, for example, this kind of is going to tap on another thing, but I just want to do it on the more general point. Mookie Betts, before he made his swing changes, so back in, I think, in 2017, he made some bigger swing changes. And before his swing changes, he was an all-star, right? But he had never been an MVP. He had never been, all those things. He had been an all-star a couple times. His bat speeds were higher, right? His bat speeds were higher. He was younger. He's more athletic, all these other things. He makes his swing change, and his bat speeds go to one of the lowest in the league. Now, compared to the general public, he's still swinging the bat pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
But comparatively to the league and compared to himself, his bat speed went lower. But contrary to what would be the general consensus of more bat speed, more power, what you actually saw was less bat speed, more power numbers.
Yeah.
And
better contact.
He was moving the bat at a slower rate of speed, but he was hitting it at better angles. He was hitting it with better spin, and he was more adjustable. So balls that used to be a single were now a double. Some of his doubles were now home runs. And so again, power is not purely connected to exit velocity or bat speed. They are high indicators, right? Again, I don't want to swing the bat at 40 miles an hour. I don't want an exit velocity of 40 miles an hour. But at the same time, there's laws of diminishing returns. And this is where I wanted to bring it back to the bigger point of how we conduct studies and the perspective that we view things from really matters, because we end up missing things because we're asking the wrong questions, or you're conducting the study in a way, or you're measuring things in a way that can lead to poor conclusions, which is the main point of you ask the wrong question to the wrong person, you'll get the wrong answer.
Yeah, love it. One final question that I have, maybe it's not a question, but I want to know, in your opinion, does anyone today have close to a perfect swing when it comes to mechanics? If you had to pick someone who, in using your farm system, using what you've learned to this date, who would you say has the best swing mechanics right now?
I think I would pretext it with kind of this of, I think everybody has, we have internal constraints of what their body is capable of doing. And so there's very quality movement for their body type, for what they're capable of, all those things, right? Now, if we go like purely efficient or all those other things, right? I think when you look into that, like, for example, like Trout is really efficient, right? Again, for how he moves, what he's capable of doing, all that stuff, like he's really highly efficient.
His body type.
Yeah, for his body type, he's very highly efficient. Now, there's a lot of things we can learn from Trout, but at the same time, like Mookie Betts, right, is also very efficient for his body type. He's made some major changes to his swing to be able to do that. Now, also too, I think in the same route of that is we got to be careful, because I also think on the same side of that, some of the reasons, not only injuries or other things too, but also, again, what we're chasing, right? If the league says, oh, higher bat speed and all these things, and then you start chasing higher bat speed, sometimes there's fall off and negative connotations. But I would also say in today's game, if I would say holistically, guys that are just like really efficient,
Who's your
I
top
think,
3?
yeah, I would say, for example, and again, he's battled some injuries and some other things, but Tatis has some really good things going on. I would also say Castellanos has some really good things going on, which is why I think his career has gone way longer. He's not, again, and the things that I look at is, okay, you're not the strongest guy in the league. Like for example, if we wanted to see great technique in boxing, MMA, all that stuff, we would never go watch the heavyweights, right? The heavyweights are not going to be the highest in technique. They're the most powerful. They can clip you and knock you out, right?
Yeah.
You'd go look at the guys that are lighter, that the only way they can knock you out is if they move super efficient and transfer force. So that would
That's a good
also
way
lead me.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that would also lead me, for example, everybody always wants to go like, oh, like let's say the Albert Pujols, or, some of these hitters that are Aaron Judges, right? These guys that are massive
Right.
dudes, right? The thing is,
Right.
though, is little guys, again, they can't get away with the same amount of force, because they don't create the same amount of force as those guys. They don't have the body weight. They don't have the potential energy. That's why, honestly, I really think if you look over long spans of time, someone that is highly efficient and has proven it over a long span of time, which is really where I think efficiency shows, is someone like Altuve. If you
Okay.
look at the top 10 hitters for the MLB in home runs over the years, right? You always see these guys. The main correlation is over 230 pounds. That's the number one correlation. Everybody's over 230 pounds. With that being said, Altuve gets into that list quite a bit, especially over the last 10 years. You see him pop into that list, and he's a small guy, right? And so he's just very elite at transferring forces. He's very efficient at using his body. And then, even though he's a very big guy, like, man, you could see it also within his results, because he does efficiency, and also too, he's a big guy. Is Alvarez on his team is I mean, the guy, his stats stand for themselves. He again some injuries and some things he's battled through recently, but at the same time, like, he's just very efficient at using his body, transferring forces. And then also too, on the other side of that, one of the things philosophy wise that I look at, and I've gone through stages, right? I've been, okay, well, is it the guy that hits for the most power? Is it the guy that is the most efficient kinematically? Or you could argue, which is where a blend of all of these things, is it the guy that hits for the highest average? Is that the best hitter, right? But I think you get to this other piece, which I've really gotten to, which is a blend of all of these, harder to measure, but word that I feel like that encapsulates all of it, is how effective are they as a hitter, right? And so you might be a little less efficient. You might be not the strongest guy. You might not hit for the highest power. You might not hit for the highest average, but are you getting the most out of who you are, right? And also too, the technique in what you're doing. Like, for example, we might dial back power a little bit to gain in other areas, right? We might dial back bat speed. We might dial back even efficiency. I might have to dial back my efficiency kinematically, but it makes me a more effective hitter that covers more zones, right? So that's where we deviate a little bit from golf. Golf, the ball's sitting on the ground, sitting there waiting for me to hit it. It's right where I want it to be, where I might have to, again, in baseball, adjust my kinematics, right? Just so that I can effectively, it's not my strongest swing. It might be my C swing, right? As some people might say, but I hit this slider at 98, whipping away from me out of the zone that the umpire has been calling 4 inches off the plate all night. And I have to hit this thing for a single to right field. And that is a very effective technique, even though it might not be the most efficient, power, etc.
So Altuve, most effective hitter then overall?
Yeah, I think if you look over the standard now, before Altuve, I would have said Miguel Cabrera. And he just isn't playing now, obviously. But Miguel Cabrera, if
Yeah.
you look at the test of, the test of time of what he's done, the Triple Crowns, the other things and things as well. But he was just
Amazing.
very efficient. He's not the strongest guy. He's not the most athletic guy. Had drinking problems that he struggled through with, and other things that he had going on off the field. My point is along with that, the reason that this man could still hit, even, I think it was like his second to last year, he still hit 270 in the big leagues with like 20 homers. It's just like, again, he's not age. He's not in his prime of his career. He was just so efficient and also effective with his technique. That again, if I had to pick somebody all time, I think Miguel Cabrera just encapsulated like all around just the skill of hitting. Now, when it comes into, being able to run for extra bags and all those things, that holistically as a player, you can pick some other guys. But when it comes into hitting, I think that he definitely would be holistically like, he made an art of it for sure.
I mean, there is an art of baseball.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I appreciate your time, Joey. I know you probably have a full afternoon lined up just like I do, but I think this is going to help a lot of people. And I think a lot of coaches especially are going to gain a lot of wisdom here. You went pretty deep on some topics that I think maybe not everyone is thinking with that mindset. And I think that's where it starts. It starts with that foundational knowledge before the application and the drills come into play. Having that knowledge, having that right foundation will allow them to provide that success for their athletes.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on and all the things, and sorry for a couple of little hiccups in the very beginning, but I know I really appreciate, the just again, this is a passion of mine. I love talking about it. I'm just like you on the other side of that, and developing players, and it was great, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, the passion definitely comes through. So keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing some amazing things.
Thank you, I appreciate it.